Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. It's nice to see so many members are here for this important debate. So we come to our last debate of this group of sessions, item 16 on the agenda, which is valuing people with Down syndrome. Members may like to have GS 2088 available. I feel that it's important to say at this point that the Synod Chaplain, Reverend Michael Gisborne, and his team are on hand if anyone would like to speak with them privately about anything which is raised this afternoon. I'd like to give everyone an outline of how I intend to approach this debate. After the Bishop of Carlisle has moved the motion, the floor will be open for general debate before we then will work our way through each amendment in turn. And then after that, we will return to the main motion as or not amended for debate. In order to be as fair as possible to the many members who have put in requests to speak, there's a large number, there will be a 3-minute speech limit when we debate the main motion. So before we start, let's have a moment's silence before I open the debate. Please, thank you. So I call upon the Bishop of Carlisle, James Newcombe, to move item 16. You have up to 10 minutes. Thank you.
James Newcombe, Carlisle, number 10. Introducing this particular debate is a huge and a humbling privilege. And I do so in my capacity as lead bishop for health and social care, which includes medical ethics. And I'd like to record my own gratitude to those who've brought this really important issue to our attention. First of all, a word or two about what the debate isn't. It is not about the ethics of abortion. The Church of England's position on that contentious topic is clearly stated in the paper GS 2088, paragraphs 34 and 35. That position is both straightforward and nuanced, principled and compassionate. And although the motion today has partly been prompted by some people's concern that the abortion rate for those diagnosed with Down syndrome could increase to nearly 100%, the rights and wrongs of abortion itself are not the purpose of our discussion. Second, it is not a regressive attack on medical discoveries and advances. In this case, non-invasive prenatal testing, or NITP, as it's known. In fact, quite the opposite. We welcome NIPT as a useful non-invasive procedure which will protect many women in the so-called high-risk category from invasive procedures such as amniocentesis, with its associated danger of miscarriage. Third, it is definitely not an attempt to tell women what they should do when faced with a desperately difficult personal decision. This motion is not designed to prejudge the response of individuals. Rather, the debate this afternoon is an affirmation of one of the most important Christian doctrines. That is, our belief that every human being is made in the image of God and is therefore of unique and eternal value. That includes people with Down syndrome, and it has massive implications both for the welcome we offer in our church communities and the support we provide for parents with Down syndrome children. This is a call for love and for practical assistance, and on countless occasions, the Christian Church has well demonstrated its ability to provide both. What's more, if, as I hope, this motion is overwhelmingly supported, the Department of Mission and Public Affairs is fully committed to following it up, both within the Church and with external partners, to facilitate the greater inclusion of people with Down syndrome in both church and society. And it will be able to do so more fully and more actively and with far greater authority than at present. This is also, this motion, a demand for really comprehensive, unbiased information and counselling, not only about the reality of Down syndrome and its implications today, but also about what NIPT is and is not. For instance, the fact that if the test is positive, it still requires invasive testing before a diagnosis can be confirmed. We are not telling people what to decide, but we do want the decisions that are made to be properly informed. And we don't want Down syndrome to be automatically presented as bad news. This is also a reminder of the huge advances that have been made during my own mother's lifetime, 90 years, with regard to those who have Down syndrome. Back in 1929, life expectancy for a Down's child was 9 years. Now it is 60 years, though admittedly with a significant risk of dementia over 50. There have been extraordinary medical and educational developments in recent decades, which mean that many children with Down syndrome are now fully involved in mainstream secondary and sometimes tertiary education. And with proper support, they can go on learning throughout their lives. We are concerned that everyone, and I include here medical staff, may be aware of the amazing progress that has been made. So let me add my own brief gloss to all this by mentioning a comment I heard on my car radio while driving beside Lake Windermere. It's a slightly irrelevant detail, but I hope may provoke a touch of envy among my more urban colleagues. The comment came from a presenter of the PM programme on Radio 4 who was interviewing the mother of a child with Down syndrome and who'd picked up the fact that we'd be debating this subject today. "Isn't it worrying," she said, "that the church should be discussing this topic?" To her eternal credit, the interviewee, who was brilliant, said no, she thought it was marvellous because the church stands for values and justice. But the journalist was expressing a secular viewpoint, which is exactly what this motion sets out to challenge. In fact, there are three aspects of that outlook in particular which we want to question, given that the choices we make as a society express the broader values we are handing on. One is the contemporary emphasis on independence as an ultimate virtue and value. This motion subscribes to the ideal of interdependence, which is fundamental to St. Paul's image of the church as a body and which informs several of our ethical stances, including on assisted suicide. A second is the inherent contradiction between a secular celebration of diversity and the unintended consequence of getting rid of anything which is inconvenient or uncomfortable, which of course results in the erosion of diversity. And connected with that is a third issue, namely an inability to face or cope with suffering. Now, I need to make it absolutely clear that the reference to human suffering in the motion's first sentence is not meant to imply that people with Down syndrome are suffering from the condition. But it does refer to some of the difficulties, such as cardiac and respiratory problems, and issues with eyesight and hearing, which often accompany Down syndrome, as well as the sometimes grave challenges facing parents. Christian theology offers a way into this, which our consumerist culture finds it quite hard to understand. But of course, the parents of Down syndrome children experience great joys as well as great heartaches and challenges. We heard about some of those at a Fringe meeting here only yesterday, not least from the wonderful Sally Phillips. And others have written in, including one man who said, "My son is 17 years old with Down syndrome. They are all different, yet to me he is not a burden at all." And a mother who's quoted in the book Far from the Tree said, "I wouldn't exchange these experiences for anything. They've made us who we are, and who we are is so much better than we would have been otherwise." Yet another speaks about how brilliantly they respond to opportunities. And at the Fringe meeting yesterday, some of you were present at, we heard about a Down syndrome boy who loves much, forgives quickly, and laughs a lot. Sally Phillips at the Fringe meeting yesterday commented on the motion that is before you now. She said how carefully crafted it was and how it's clear that it sets out to gain maximum consensus and coalition with others. "Please don't do anything," she said, "that might imperil its passage or create bias against people who have had a termination." I mention this with some of the proposed amendments in mind, all of which are very well intentioned, but not all of which, as we shall hear, I hope, would be entirely helpful. So let me close by quoting the final paragraph of GS 2088, which sums up the essence of this motion. "People with Down syndrome are complete human beings, made in the image of God, deserving full inclusion in both church and society. It is imperative that every step is taken to ensure that they are welcomed, celebrated, and treated with dignity and respect. And as Sally Phillips remarked yesterday, people with Downs have a special place at the great banquet." I am very glad to be able to move this motion in my name.
So, item 16 is now open for debate. The speech limit is 3 minutes. Mark Bratton, please, followed by Isabel Adcock. Thank you.
Mark Bratton, Coventry 100. I wholeheartedly support the Bishop of Carlisle's extremely well-worded motion. Whether the fear of a world without Down syndrome is well-founded or not, I think we are right to be concerned about the eugenic undertones and hurtful impact of some aspects of the debate. An important paper by Vardit Ravitsky in the Hastings Center Report, which is an American bioethics journal, has helped me to clarify some of my thoughts in this area. Ravitsky argues that the ethics of prenatal screening is characterized by a tension between two competing rationales for screening, which are difficult, if not impossible, to reconcile. The first ethical rationale for screening is that it promotes a woman or couple's so-called reproductive autonomy, the right of a woman or a couple to make capable, informed, and uncoerced choices about whether to accept the offer of testing or to terminate a pregnancy when a serious disability or condition is diagnosed. On this ground, the point of offering access to prenatal testing is to support and promote women's or couples' informed choices. However, according to Ravitsky, this principle of reproductive autonomy is being undermined by another rationale, what he calls the public health rationale. The public health rationale for screening, he says, is and always was to reduce the incidence of fetal abnormalities and thus the burden of disease on the population. And this has created a clinical situation in which otherwise autonomous women and couples feel pressured into accepting testing and selecting termination. These women and couples fear the stigma and even punishment for the social consequences of their refusal. Understandably, Ravitsky regards the public health rationale for prenatal testing objectionable on moral grounds. And I find this distinction a helpful way of identifying the principal concern underpinning this motion. It would be very easy to turn this into a debate about the ethics of abortion, which of course is integrally linked to the issues of reproductive autonomy. But that is another debate to be had at another time. By affirming the value of people with Down syndrome, we have the opportunity this afternoon to identify, expose, and expunge the severe public ethic that insidiously suggests that we are only truly and fully human if we possess certain cognitive, physical, and social capacities. As Christians, we have a richer and truer vision of what it means to be human. People with potential, however attenuated, which is best realized in an atmosphere of love, trust, and community. Ironically, one of the best ways of beginning to combat this severe public ethic is to work to promote genuine reproductive autonomy, as the other elements of the Bishop of Carlisle's motion imply. This is a project which I believe the Church of England can make a significant contribution to.
Thank you. Thank you. After Isabel Adcock has spoken, I ask the Archbishop of York to speak, please. Thank you.
Isabel Adcock, Chelmsford 269. Thank you for calling me. It's been said it takes two to produce a child and a village to raise one. I'm fortunate to live in a village, and even today to recognise that all children are watched over by the community. It can be challenging, as most of us here know, to bring up children. I have 4, and I'm grateful for the support of my community. We have 2 people in the village who have Downs. The first married their childhood sweetheart and was watched over by their mother until she died. Today, the whole community watches over them. The shop assistants, the doctors, the neighbours, friends, extended family, and yes, the churches. We all keep a watching brief, and occasionally have unfortunately been necessary to call in the social workers. They manage their money and household, as well as many others. The other person is a teenager who works when they have the opportunity. They volunteer very readily. And since the grandmother died last year, helps with the family and the running of the house. Again, the community as a whole keeps a watching brief. Both are very valued members of society, but we know that they and we are lucky. We live in a community that, yes, can be at times very claustrophobic, but it is supportive. Most do not. Other villages around are dormitories. And in towns, people often don't even know their neighbours, let alone seem to care. The church communities may be supportive, but they generally draw their congregations from a fairly wide area and only see each other on Sundays. I personally know the challenge. 30 years ago last month, I underwent a test. My 4th child had been born with Pateau syndrome, mentioned in the report, and died at 5 days. I was informed it was unusual for a live birth. I was also told that Downs had a very definite wide spectrum of severity. My 5th child, when he was born, and I did not have to make a decision, I was very lucky, often complained he didn't know his brother. And many people in the village were affected by what happened. When people go for these tests, particularly if they've had problems before, they need support. They need support from everybody. I passionately believe that all are made in God's image and are God's children. But these decisions for parents are incredibly difficult. Grief will be there. We need to build loving communities that are non-judgmental, that will support all who inhabit them and those outside them. People need to know that they will be looked after every day and every hour, not just on Sundays. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. After the Archbishop of York, John Sentime, who has spoken, Rachel Wilson will speak. Thank you.
Chair, Synod, I'd like to thank the Bishop of Carlisle for the ironic and nuanced way in which he introduced this motion, ruling out certain arguments some people have been having, and stand to speak really to support paragraph C. I chaired the National Steering Committee for Screening People with Sickle Cell and Thalassemia, a 12-year work that we did. Our approach was to give parents informed choice. And in a 10-year research, involving health professionals, community groups, those who are carriers of sickle cell and thalassemia disease, we really did work hard. And the program now, which is in place, has been seen by the World Health Organization. They say the NHS has the best program for screening people with sickle cell and thalassemia in the world. And for that, I'm very grateful that the government put in a lot of money to do the research. Every baby now who's born in this country immediately screened. And I think that's just fantastic. So there is no way of discriminating anybody. And our own daughter was screened. The baby was born. She's a carrier. The baby doesn't actually have sickle cell. But this particular program, at its heart, was to ensure that parents are given informed choices. And there will be carers, there will be informers, there will be people who actually help. It is one of the best programs now in the National Health Service. And I want to suggest the same thing in C to support the continued development of antenatal care, including process of information, that new self-screening techniques are provided. If it has been done for sickle cell and thalassemia, for people with Downs, in the same way, it ought to be happening in a way that actually gives people wonderful, wonderful information. And again, in that particular program, and the amount of money and the time that was taken by all those who are very good at this question of informed choice for both carriers, possible parents, and other people. Again, it is taken away one of the greatest problem in the world, ignorance. When you don't know, you can actually be so frightened and so petrified, and yet the gospel of Jesus Christ tells us in the letter of John, there is no fear in love, because love casts out. What this motion is about is to put love where love isn't, to make sure that people are given informed choices and they can actually then live lives. I'm a godfather to a Down syndrome child. The parents were missionaries out in Uganda. Trish, the mother, died at childbirth to a Down syndrome child. Father was so heartbroken that the mother had died. He, 4 years later on, walked on a train and also died, very great psychiatrist. So we were left to care for this particular child. He's delightful. He's outlived his parents. He's delightful. But it requires a lot of love, a lot of care, a lot of compassion. And that phrase affirmed the dignity and full humanity of people born with Down syndrome. This is what this synod is all about, and we want to affirm this and want to ensure that our work has at the heart of it tremendous love. Jack, when I meet him, He makes you feel this is the sort of place I want to be in, where everybody is so loved, is so cared for. Preparing him for confirmation was not an easy matter, but we did get there. And I'm sure he's full of the Spirit, like you and me. So I thank Synod, I thank the Bishop who brought this motion. Let's, with confidence in Christ, with his love, his grace, see everybody with tremendous dignity, and what has been done for sickle cell and thalassemia, may it be the same program, of the same standard, of the same quality, of the same care, of the same compassion. God bless you.
Thank you. After Rachel Wilson has given her maiden speech, we will then work our way through the amendments. Thank you.
My name is Rachel Wilson. I'm Rochester. I wish to speak in support of this motion which is in front of us. Indeed, on one level, it seems extraordinary to me that as a synod we would not want to be welcoming of people with Downs. But this should not be just a commitment to be kind and benevolent, but a recognition that as churches we are called to provide places where disabled people can actively participate. It is not for me to dictate to any parent what choice they must make in the face of a diagnosis of Downs. But I do think that we need to remove the link between perceived capacity and whether a life is really worth living. What I do know is that being born with a disability is not a disaster. I know myself to be wonderfully made in the image of God. And it is important that Synod realise that in coming to that realisation, that moment, which I can put a date and a time to, was transformative in what it was to be me. Because I had no longer to constantly fall short on the world's terms, but I realised that I am what God has made me to be. And if it was good enough for God, it was okay with me. But, make no mistake, my medical record is a catalogue of disaster. It is not untrue, but it bears no relation to me. And had my parents been able to test for my condition, they would surely not have been blamed for reaching the conclusion that the life of their unborn child with this catalogue of disaster in front of her would be too difficult. And yet, with all due apology to any doctors that are in the room, I was blessed with parents who saw fit to completely ignore what the medical profession told them. And I am enormously grateful that they did that. I was also born within the termination limit. It was clear that I had been without oxygen for a very long time, and yet it appears that God might have known what he was about. But we do a dangerous and a disingenuous thing if we look at disabled people and imagine for the worst what their lives must be like. The beginning of an individual story does not dictate its end. And I pray, I believe that as a people who know ourselves to be children of God, that we will have the imagination simply not to just welcome people as an opportunity for us to demonstrate how kind and generous we are, but to recognise the gospel imperative to foster people as individuals, that they might grow to be the people that God intends them to be.
Thank you, Rachel. Members, let's move on to working our way through the amendments. They are found on Order Paper 5. And when we debate the amendments, the speech limit will be 2 minutes. So as we come to item 29, I invite Reverend Canon Martin Taylor to speak to and move the amendment, standing in his name. You have up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Martin Taylor, Lincoln 152. I wish to amend Clause A from affirm the dignity and full humanity of people born with Down syndrome to affirm the dignity and full humanity of people with Down syndrome before as well as after birth. Yesterday lunchtime, I had the privilege of listening to Heidi, a wonderful 20-year-old self-advocate for those with Down syndrome, and I quote, "My name's Heidi, I'm 20 years old, I work in a hair salon, I've got Down syndrome, and my life is just as important and just as joyful as anyone else's. When parents are told their baby has a disability, they don't always get the support and information they need, and they're not told that their little one can thrive and blossom. They're not told the potential this new human life has and how much love and happiness they can have and bring to the lives of their family and society. The government are considering introducing another test that could lead to fewer children with Down syndrome being born every year. This is because our society and the health services don't realise that children with disabilities are part of the diversity and richness of life. Parents need to be shown the support and given help to have and to look after their babies instead of being faced with a hopeless choice. I'm here because I believe we're all equally valuable and should be equally valued. Mums and dads should be given the help they need so they don't see a disabled baby as a worry, but the beginning of their happy adventure." And she said, "Don't screen us out, work with us so that we can make a society that treats everyone with the dignity and respect and compassion and love that we all deserve." I thank the Bishop of Carlisle for bringing this motion to Synod and want to wholeheartedly affirm our support and welcome for people with Down syndrome. I simply want to reflect in my amendment that the process of affirmation begins even before a child with an extra chromosome is born. As a child, we need to reassure the parents who know they're very likely to have a baby with Down syndrome because they've had a test, that both the Church of England and their local church are there for the whole family, that we already love and value their child, and that we're going to journey with them in the decision that they've already made. The specific wording proposed is the same as that used in the UN Declaration of the Rights of the Child, 1959, whereas the child, by reason of his physical and mental immaturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth. The premise of the UNDHR is that the child in the womb is vulnerable and needs safeguards, especially if that child has any disability. UNESCO's International Bioethics Committee states, "The widespread use of genetic screening, and in particular of NIPT, may foster a culture of perfectionism or zero defect, and even renew some eugenic trends, with the consequence that it could become more and more difficult to accept imperfection and disability as a part of normal human life and a component of the diversity we're all called on to acknowledge and respect. The right of an individual to make autonomous choices is to be made consistent with the right not to be subjected to discrimination or stigmatization based on genetic characteristics, and the duty to respect every human being in her or his uniqueness." Sally Phillips, who also spoke at yesterday's Fringe meeting, spoke about a friend who was expecting a child with Down syndrome being phoned on 9 separate occasions by the clinic to see if she had changed her mind about wanting to keep her child. For such people, it is so important that they hear us affirming the dignity and full humanity of the child that they are carrying before she or he is born, as well as afterwards. To mishandle the news about Down syndrome, either before or after birth, can create stigma and discrimination, not only for the individual, but for the whole community of those living with that condition. As Sally Phillips said, Down syndrome isn't a disease, it's a type of person. People who have Down syndrome may be different, but they're worth no less than anyone else. We are all human beings, we all count. As a church, I believe we should be saying to all people, including those with chromosome 21, we affirm your full dignity and humanity, both before and after you're born. We're so pleased that you exist. We welcome you. I move my amendment.
Thank you. I invite the Bishop to comment, please. You have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Now we understand absolutely where this amendment is coming from, have a lot of sympathy with it. Very clear, I think, from our paper that we're committed absolutely to people with Downs both before and after birth. But I already mentioned Sally Phillips's plea with us not to change the motion too much so that we can attract the widest possible support within and beyond the church. And the difficulty, to my mind, with this amendment is that it touches, whether inadvertently or otherwise, on a much more complex and controversial matter, which is the status of the human embryo. So now there's a very major debate to be had about when the embryo becomes fully human, at conception, as some believe, after 14 days, and so on, or at some undefined point after that. Very important debate to be had, but not today. We're trying to unite people within and beyond the churches to affirm people with Down syndrome in the face of the possible unintended consequences of the screening process. And to make a real impact on public policy, we need that wide coalition. My fear is that this amendment also brings unintended consequences because it implies a position on the status of the human embryo without actually stating that position clearly or rehearsing the arguments for it. Church of England's current position on that topic is clear, nuanced, and actually quite conservative. And if we want to revisit that position, that should be done in a debate for which there's been proper preparation and explanation of the ethical principles, not as an amendment, however well-intentioned, to a debate focused on people with Down syndrome. I don't object to the implications of the amendment at all, but I don't think this is the place or the proper process to open up those issues. And I should add that the Convention on the Rights of the Child doesn't define appropriate legal protection. Because we want to build a wide coalition behind the substantive motion, I urge Synod to reject this amendment.
Thank you. Item 29 is now open for debate. Would you like to come and make your speech, please? Thank you. Oh, Nick Land, thank you. You will have 2 minutes, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Land, York 438. For 20 years, for more than 20 years, I've worked as a specialist psychiatrist for people with learning disabilities. So over the years, I have met dozens of people with Down syndrome and their families. So what can I tell you? They're people. They love and they are loved. Now, most people with Down syndrome don't need to see a psychiatrist. So those I met were all facing additional challenges, and yet virtually none of their families would have been without their enriching presence in their life. But I can also tell you that for many people with Down syndrome, society's preoccupation in finding more effective ways of removing them from society is a heavy burden to bear. And I've had a number of conversations with people with Down syndrome who've tearfully asked me why people want them to be dead. Do we feel strongly enough about the injustice of a legal system which denies people with Down syndrome and others with disability the protections it offers to the rest of its citizens? The fact that there's a 24-week limit for abortion, except for the disabled, entrenches discrimination against people with disability from before birth. As Christians, we do not value people by their genetic profile or by their economic productivity, but as people created in the image of God, who Jesus loved enough to die for. So let us affirm the dignity and full humanity of people with Down syndrome before and after birth. And let us ask for prospective parents to be given comprehensive and positive information about people with Down syndrome. This is an area where we should not be unbiased as a church. And just as we should have a bias to the poor, so we should have a bias to life, a bias to the vulnerable, and a bias to love. Thank you.
Simon Butler, please, thank you.
Simon Butler, Southwark 219. I hadn't intended to speak, but the motion that Martin has helpfully brought forward has crystallised some thoughts. I have been reminded my mother's life working in an abortion clinic and the stories that she has told. So I'm very aware of the problems and the issues that are around that drive Martin's concern. However, what we do sometimes when we want to raise an important principle is we focus on the principle and not on people. And what I fear Martin's amendment is doing is moving us away from the focus of this particular motion, which is on people with Down syndrome, and away from towards a discussion on the principle of abortion. We can have that debate somewhere else. I will also be opposing Emma Forward's motion, therefore, but I think we need to keep this focused on the people this motion is meant to be discussing, not on the principle.
Thank you. Yes, point of order, Anthony Archer. Yes, that has my consent. Does that have the consent of Synod? Please show. Thank you. All those against? Thank you. So we move to vote then on item 29, this amendment from Martin Taylor. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. And all those against please show? Thank you. That is lost. So item 29 is lost. We now move to amendment 30. So I invite Emma Forward to come and speak to and move the amendment standing in her name. You have up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Emma Forward, 309 Exeter. Just to start with a response to what I just heard from Simon Butler, I don't actually see the difference between the principle and the people. I think we're standing up for the principle and we're standing up for the people. That's my immediate response to that. And just to move into a speech that I wrote this morning on this, my amendment gives the Church of England a chance to make an actual, tangible difference in the face of the very real threat to Down syndrome children before birth. I speak of the attitude not of expecting parents themselves, but of a medical system whose practice is to present the expectation that a pregnancy ought to be terminated once a Down syndrome child is identified. If I could ask you to look first at the second part of my amendment, I intend to strengthen Clause D with the very words found in the guidance paper, GS 2088, to say that the comprehensive information parents ought to be entitled to should not be accompanied by the presumption that termination of their pregnancy is normal or the natural course of action. Hence, I ask that we add, without initiation of termination, to the final clause. Without initiation of discussion of termination to the final clause. Then to work backwards to the first part of my amendment, here we have the chance to make a very clear statement on the unquestionable value of Down syndrome people by, as a church, advising that pregnancies should not be terminated on the basis of Down syndrome. I really want to be clear that within this, I would like to qualify that any parent, regardless of their decision, past or future, is loved by God and welcome in our church, and to say that some pregnancies to acknowledge that some pregnancies are so fraught with complication and danger that it isn't always simple. Nevertheless, I feel that this church, God's church, needs to make a strong and clear statement today which boldly asserts the value of Down syndrome people against the prevailing medical model, which encourages termination unilaterally and which I fear will only be exacerbated by new screening techniques. Synod is so good at talking, affirming, and welcoming that it neglects that it has the potential to be doing. Let's do something to prove that we mean it when we say that we value Down syndrome people. Please vote for my amendment.
Thank you. I invite the Bishop to come and make his comments, please. Thank you. You have up to 2 minutes.
I want to thank Emma very much indeed for that deeply compassionate amendment. I understand exactly where she's coming from, have plenty of sympathy with that position and agree with just about everything she said. The Church's position, though, on this is clear. We've been supporting, for instance, Lord Shinkwin's motion in the House of Lords. This, though, and I'm making the same point as I made a moment ago, is a motion that we want to be able to put to Her Majesty's government and other professional bodies. And this runs a serious risk of derailing it. We're speaking to others here, not just ourselves. And although that second comment does indeed come from the background paper, we don't need to include everything that's in the background paper in the actual motion itself. We will be bringing up this sort of point in our continuing conversations. And anyway, as we have now discovered, and we hadn't realized this when the background paper was written, for that I apologize, it could be construed as going against GMC guidelines, not least advising that pregnancy should not be terminated on the basis of Down syndrome could be seen as putting pressure on women and even criticizing them. So I would ask Synod to resist this amendment despite the enormous sympathy we have with it.
Thank you. Yes, David Lamming.
David Lamming, 399 St Edmund Ipswich. Bearing in mind the comments of the Bishop of Carlisle just now and the concern not to derail the motion, which I wholeheartedly support, I wonder if consideration could be given to taking this amendment in 2 parts so that we can vote on both parts separately.
Thank you very much for that important point. I'm minded to say no because I'm very conscious of the time and there are plenty of people who really wish to speak and have a burning desire to speak on the main motion. Thank you. So, I invite Andrew Gray to speak, followed by Jamie Harrison. Thank you. You will both have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Andrew Gray, Norwich 371. I'd like to begin by saying I wholeheartedly support the whole motion, but I also wholeheartedly support the amendment put forward by Emma Ford. This debate is not about abortion, and it's not about condemning people for abortion, but it is impossible to ignore the subject of abortion. We live in a society where secular, politically correct liberalism is the dominant cultural force. We live in a society which claims to value and appreciate those people who are different and those who have any form of disability. And yet what we say and what we do are 2 very different things. It is easy to signal virtue when it comes to preaching the secular gospel of diversity and inclusivity. However, the facts speak for themselves. In countries like Iceland, Down syndrome has been virtually eliminated. According to the BBC, in the United Kingdom, the termination rate for fetuses diagnosed with Down syndrome is 90%. In Denmark, the figure is 98%. To give you an idea of the current culture that we have, in 2015, a Dutch newspaper ran an article pointing out that it costs between 1 and 2 million euros to support the life of someone with Down syndrome during their lifetime, and how much easier would it be if they weren't there. What we have, my friends, is a very simple situation. The UK and Europe has begun to practice eugenics by default and without intent. This is not because of a state-led desire to remove those who are considered weak or subhuman. We don't live in 1930s Germany, thank God. But while the reasons and the motivations are different, the outcome is the same. I refer to 1930s Germany with some caution because the Third Reich has a habit of being dragged into debates, but quite frankly, when it comes to this one, I'm afraid there are some stark comparisons. Today, we face a different challenge. No one is advocating a state-led eugenics program, but that is what is happening. Now, either the church says we value people with Downs and means it, or we don't. If we value people with Downs, then we cannot agree that Downs is a basis for abortion. It cannot be so. If we weaken our message, and I understand the Bishop of Carlisle's very good intentions for this, but if we weaken our message, then we send a very clear message to those. Thank you.
Thank you for bearing with us. After Jamie Harrison has spoken, I will call Vivian Goddard for a 1-minute speech limit, and then I'm looking for a motion of closure, please, on this item.
Jamie Harrison, Durham 299. Thank you, Chair. I want to pick up the point made by the Bishop in relation to the General Medical Council, and I've warned Emma, for whom I have the greatest respect, as she knows, but this is life. Our deaths in this case, isn't it? What the concern really is very simple, that in the GMC's good medical practice duties of a doctor, and I speak as a GP by training and background, it's very clear certain things are laid out that we're required to do. If you look at the duties of a doctor, paragraph 48, it's around respecting patients fairly and respectfully doing so. But secondly, in paragraph 49, there's a requirement on doctors to share information needed to make decisions about their care. And my concern is on the E on our screens, which is actually in addition to D, you'll see the context. The context is speaking not just to government, but to professional bodies such as Royal Colleges, obstetrics and GP, but also the General Medical Council. And my fear with this is, although I agree with the general direction of it, if it's seen just that we cannot bring this up, unless it's brought up by the patients, this could be seen as a sort of carte blanche for not being able to engage in a proper discussion with the patients. Now, I know that all good practitioners wouldn't do that, but my fear is flagging up something, as we've heard, that could just be saying we're against abortion or this is a very strident statement. So I'm afraid I'm asking you to resist this amendment. And if you want to add to D, then you've got John Appleby's option, which again further clarifies what might be the offering. But I worry that this is a bit too stark, although I'm quite with Emma's direction of travel.
Thank you. Vivian Goddard, please, thank you.
Vivian Goddard, 254 Blackburn. I too hadn't intended to speak, but I'm in the difficult position of if we don't accept something like this, I can't vote for the entire motion. But I accept the fact that the Bishop of Carlisle did not intend for it to sound like it was advocating abortion, but I'm afraid it can be read in that way. Therefore, I would beg Synod to put something in so that we can vote as a whole, so that the whole Synod can support this motion. Otherwise, some of us are going to be in a very difficult position of having to vote. I should probably just go and catch a train, actually. But otherwise, what would I have to do? I'd have to vote against valuing Down syndrome people in our churches, which I couldn't possibly do. The problem with the church I'm in at the moment is that we haven't got a Down syndrome person. I think it's the only church I've ever been in where we haven't had one, and they are so valued and so valuable from the beginning of their life. And we really do need something in it just to take out this edge, which gives the suggestion that could be understood that we are advocating abortion.
Thank you, Vic. Yes, a point of order, thank you.
Paul Ayres, Leeds 130. Chair, is it in order to avoid a divisive vote on this amendment, is it in order to move to item 31 without voting on this?
Thank you, everyone. Having sought advice, We cannot move to next business on an amendment. Thank you. So I'm looking for a motion of closure. Oh, I see John Freeman's standing. Marvellous. Thank you. Yes, I do. Does that have the consent of Synod? All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Anyone against? Thank you. So let's move to the vote without further ado. Will all those in favour of item 30 please show? And all those against, now please show. Thank you. So item 30, Emma Forward's motion, amendment, is lost. Thank you. Let's move swiftly on to the next amendment, item 31. So I call Dr. John Appleby to speak to and move the amendment standing in his name. You have up to 5 minutes. Anything less would be great, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and John Appleby, Newcastle 367. Just for clarity, I should also say I'm a member of MPA Council, which provided some of the background to this paper. All I seek to do in this amendment is to add some clarity to something which is clear in the report, but I fear might be unclear to those reading the conclusions. Comprehensive, unbiased information should mean just that, comprehensive. But we've heard a story of somebody we've heard more than one story about people for whom the medically provided information may have been comprehensive medically, but was not comprehensive about the prospects for a person with Down syndrome and the support available. So the sole point of my amendment is to make that clear to any reader. I'm proposing that the full information includes information about support available and future prospects, and adds, which I believe would also cover some of the concerns in the previous amendment, with no implied preference for any outcome. And that's simply to emphasise comprehensive and unbiased and what we mean by it. And that's all I wish to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite the Bishop to comment, please. You have up to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're very grateful to John for that clarification. We see entirely where this is going, what he's desiring to do, and we have no problem at all with his amendment, and we'd be quite happy for people to accept it.
Thank you. Item 31 is now open for debate. At the moment, there is a 2-minute speech limit. Eleanor, please. Sorry, I can't remember your surname. Thank you. Followed by the lady in the grey, please. Thank you.
Robert Shaw, 217 Sheffield. Thank you for calling me Chair. I wish to support this amendment, but also with the caveat that I need to make you aware that I don't have a lot of experience and knowledge of working with people with Down syndrome. That was until 2013 when I came into my first incumbency parish and met Simon. Simon is a few months older than me, and his parents attend one of my churches. He now lives in supported accommodation 20 miles away, but whenever he's home, he's in church. And I always know when Simon is home because the atmosphere of the church is lifted by his presence. In his childhood, Simon was instrumental in getting the peace introduced in our Sunday morning service. He embraced both the concept of the peace and members of the congregation, quite literally. To this day, whenever Simon is there, the congregation go from being handshakers to huggers. Simon just brings out the best in us all. He is also someone who chunters about being bossed about by assertive church ladies. No one else dare do this. But what his parents wanted me to bring to you is the struggle that they faced as Simon was growing up. They didn't always get the support that they required, and it was an exhausting fight to get where they needed to be and the support that Simon required. And so I ask you to support this amendment so that people not only get information, but get realistic information about what they face in the future. Simon is a great joy, I absolutely love him to bits, as do his parents, but it is hard and comprehensive information should always be provided. Thank you.
Thank you. After this next lady has spoken, I'm hoping for a motion of closure on this item, please. Item 31. Thank you.
Sue Edney, Worcester, 431. Pink jumper from yesterday. I want to tell you my story to support John's suggestion. It was a Friday late afternoon when my GP rang with my routine blood test results 10 weeks into my pregnancy. There was an unusually, abnormally high risk of Down syndrome. I had been loving my pregnancy and we were excited for the future. But this news tore our world apart. We clung to each other that weekend in fear. Now, my husband is a GP. He knew the routine, but even he felt a loss of control as we were soon in front of a consultant pointing us to the invasive and risky amniocentesis. Fortunately, we recalled our discussions before pregnancy and were able to say that we did not want to go ahead. The consultant was dumbfounded. It was as if he was programmed for that route only. His counsel had no options. I regained my pleasure and excitement as we took back control on our terms, but felt that it would have been so easy to get caught up in this process, in our fragile, emotional state. That was 25 years ago, and our daughter was born without Down syndrome. It could have been very different had we gone down that route. I hesitate to say we were lucky, but you can see where I'm coming from. So I have no hesitation in supporting this amendment.
Thank you. John Freeman, thank you. I do. Does that have the consent of Synod? With all those in favour, please show. Thank you. Anyone against, please show. Thank you. So we now move to vote on this amendment, item 31. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. All those against, please show. That is clearly carried. Thank you very much. So that will now be incorporated into the main motion. And so now we move to our last amendment, item 32. I call Ms Prudence Daly to speak to and move the amendment. Standing in her name, you have up to 5 minutes. Obviously, as you know, anything less would be great. Thank you.
Prudence Daly, 376 Oxford. In Iceland, over the past 5 years, almost 100% of babies who were diagnosed prenatally with Down syndrome have been aborted. Out of about 4,000 babies born in Iceland last year, only a couple have Down syndrome. And Denmark is not far behind. There, 98% of babies diagnosed prenatally with Downs are aborted, and Denmark expects to be Down syndrome free by 2030. And not far behind that is the UK at 90%, so we have nothing to boast about. Both Iceland and Denmark insist that mothers are not coerced into aborting babies with Down syndrome. But the figures tell a story of a society in which attitudes are nudging women towards abortion when their unborn baby is diagnosed as having Downs. On an American CBS report, which can be seen on YouTube, a social worker at the National University Hospital of Iceland who counsels pregnant women is interviewed, and she says, "The cute little one, they act so cute. But an 18-year-old boy with Down syndrome plus other problems is not maybe a good thing." And in an interview for Vice News, which you can also find online, a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Copenhagen says, "I think that Danish women are less sentimental about aborting malformed fetuses, partly because that view is supported by professional medical staff." Just let that sink in. There really is only one word for this: eugenics. It's an offence against God and against humanity. As bad as things are for babies born diagnosed prenatally for Down syndrome in the UK, they're even worse in Iceland and Denmark especially. And I know we all agree that our care for the vulnerable doesn't end at our borders. This amendment asks us to encourage our partner churches in the Porvoo Communion to uphold the value of people with Down syndrome and oppose these developments, because encouragement is the language of friendship. Synod, please ask our partner churches to stand with us in this. Please support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite the Bishop to comment, please. You have up to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to Prudence, but at the risk of repeating myself, why change the habit of a lifetime? We do need a very clear motion that we can put in front of the government and professional bodies and others. Now, matters to do with interchurch relations are really important, but they will be utterly inexplicable to the audience we are trying to address here. And if the motion is passed without this amendment, we are nonetheless committed to opening discussions on these matters, and I hope that will come as a reassurance to Prudence, not only with our Porvoo partners in Denmark and Iceland, and I should emphasize that those countries were only cited as examples. They're not the only places where there are concerns, but we will do so through the proper ecumenical channels, and also through the other networks, both formal and informal, which we enjoy for discussions with those churches. So Synod, please do resist this amendment so that we can make a very clear representation to the bodies that are concerned with policy in these fields.
Thank you. Item 32 is now open for debate. The speech limit is 2 minutes. I invite the Bishop of... Wow. If Peterborough, Donald Alistair to speak, followed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. Thank you.
Donald Alistair, Peterborough 31. I have huge sympathy with what Prudence is asking, and I weep at the thought of what is happening in the countries mentioned and others and our own. However, this is not how we work with our partner churches. I speak as the chair of the Council for Christian Unity, overseeing those relations. We talk quietly and in a gentle way and one-to-one with our partner churches. We don't address them through motions at Synod. It's not the best or most helpful way. Of course, these things need to be said and can be said, but our partner churches read our Synod material. They see the motions that we put forward. They will be well aware of this, and in our conversations through the Porvoo Agreement and in other ways, our partner churches will be made fully aware of what we're saying, but this isn't the way to speak to them.
Thank you. Archbishop of Canterbury, please. Thank you.
Justin Welby, Canterbury 1. I agree with what Bishop Donald just said, and if it helps the Synod in making up their minds on this amendment, which I hope, for the reasons, although I agree with the sentiments and very much see the point of it, I undertake that when I next have a meeting with Porvoo primates that I will discuss this with them.
Thank you. Yes, John Freeman. I do. Thank you very much. Does that have the consent of Synod? Please show. Thank you. All those in favour? All those against? Please show. Okay, so let's move on to voting. Will all those in favour of item 32, Prudence Dahlia's amendment, please show? Thank you. Will all those against please show? Thank you. So item 32 falls. Right, now we can get back to debating the main motion, which now incorporates John Appleby's amendment number 31. The speech limit at this stage is 3 minutes. Thank you. I invite the Bishop of Ely to come and speak, please, followed by Tifa, please. Thank you. Robinson.
Stephen Conway, Bishop of Ely, number 16. As the Anglican bishop accompanying large communities in the UK and around the world, communities where people with and without learning disabilities work and share life together, I'm privileged to have the ongoing opportunity to learn from and engage with many people with Down syndrome. At the most recent international meeting of l'Arche, the budget, rather spontaneously, was presented through dance and song. And I commend this practice to the Archbishop's Council, on which I sit. Jean Vernier, who co-founded the first large community with 2 men with learning difficulties, spoke of how his life among differently abled people has taught him how to be human. He believes that by welcoming the poorest and the weakest among us, we can be transformed, and we recognize that we are never truly human when we are autonomous and powerful. People who rely on others for their survival and flourishing, and who rely on their interdependence with others, are the people who are most alive. Our identity is a gift of God in creation, and we need to learn from the virtues of the given life, the life that God has given and chosen for us, to learn steadfastness, patience, hope, and above all, love. And all those who relate to people with Down syndrome and those with other learning difficulties know that, as they say in the Northeast, you cast your bread on the waters and it comes back as a full high tea. As related forms of healthcare and social attitudes have improved, many people with Down syndrome now live long and fulfilling lives, many enjoying mainstream education, employment, and fundamentally the opportunity to achieve their potential as full and flourishing members of our society. This is possible, not least because people with Down syndrome are prevalent and visible, and it's that visibility and the continuity of their life that it is allowing for improved social acceptance, leading to a more inclusive and positive understanding of diversity in our society. I believe passionately that disabled people have much to teach us about living in the truth and working for inclusion and genuine diversity. So many contemporary ideologies seek a tidy but coercive uniformity, when any rich contact with those whom society usually despises or excludes show us that real joy is found when we rejoice in diversity and difference, including diversity and difference in physical and intellectual ability. Maurice West, the Australian novelist who wrote many fictional novels about the papacy, wrote one novel about the imminent return of our Lord Jesus Christ. The pledge of the love of the returning Christ was the gift of a young child with Down syndrome. We must take care not to deny ourselves God's invitation to learn from those who present us with an opportunity to know that pledge of Christ's love.
Thank you. Point of order, John Freeman. I'd like to hear another couple of or so speeches, please. Thank you. So after, and then I'll be reminded to do that. Thank you. After Tifa Robinson, I call Timothy Good to speak, please, followed by the lady in the purple. Thank
you. Tifa Robinson, 209, Edmondsbury and Ipswich. We're discussing today the implications of a particular medical testing development that pertains to the people with Down syndrome. But I wanted to talk a little from the perspective as a parent of a child with a different special need. Our daughter Abigail was born with autism, was diagnosed at the age of 3. Autism and Down syndrome aren't the same, of course, but there are sometimes similarities. Despite the excellent support that she gets at our local school, she's years behind her peers in terms of reading, writing, and social skills and self-care. But she has a strong and childlike faith has been known to correct her teachers on their understanding of Christian eschatology, and for some reason, Jesus often enjoys a picnic with his disciples on her head. Here's the thing. She is a wonderful child who is, if I'm honest, a bit of a handful sometimes, who needs a family life which is structured, predictable, and calm. So what on earth was God doing when he gave her to us to look after? I completely understand why expectant parents who discover they're having a child with a disability would wonder whether they will be able to cope, and so often decide that abortion is their only option. The truth is that none of us are prepared or equipped to be the sort of parents that we need to be. But that's no reason not to bring children made in the image of God into the world and love them and care for them the best that we can with the help of God. As a church, we need to ensure such parents of our support and advocacy, in particular for the erosion of support for disabled people in our schools and in independent living as adults. Let us pass this motion overwhelmingly, so that as a church we can be seen to say that children with Down syndrome and all those with disabilities deserve life as much as anyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. After the lady in the purple has spoken, I'll be interested in a motion for closure on this debate. Thank you.
Caroline Herbert, Norwich 372. Thank you for calling me, Chair. I welcome this motion wholeheartedly and hope that Synod will vote overwhelmingly for it. But I would have loved to have been able to hear directly the voices of people with Down syndrome in this chamber as part of the debate. I know those at a fringe meeting yesterday were able to hear directly from Heidi, and it would have been wonderful if we could have heard either directly or perhaps through a video. Inclusion of these voices in the Synod chamber would send a really powerful message and show that we mean what we say when we talk about welcoming people in Clause B. And I would urge Synod to go back to the parishes and think not just about welcome, but how that welcome can lead to inclusion, the inclusion that's mentioned at the end of GS 2088. Not only are people with Down syndrome complete human beings made in the image of God, but those who have faith in Christ are our brothers and sisters. They're part of the body of Christ. And like all members of that body, they have been given gifts to bring for the benefit of all. So if there are people with Down syndrome in your churches, and we heard of Simon earlier, please think about what their gifts are. Don't just welcome them, but think about what they bring to the congregation and how they can use those gifts to serve others. Thank you.
Thank you. And now let's hear Timothy Good's speech, please. Thank you.
Good Southwark 221. I wish to share with Synod how reading this motion impacted on me as someone who lives daily with a hereditary congenital bone condition. Reading the motion brought back to the surface questions of personal worth and value. What does it mean that we are all made in the image and likeness of God? I wondered whether there was a blood test for multiple exostosis, knowing that it is only a matter of time before there is. What would be the story that would be shared when a diagnosis of multiple exostosis was being given to a pregnant mother? It could be my story, as someone who was in and out of hospital as a child and teenager, having invasive orthopedic surgery, periods of considerable pain that still impacts on my quality of life, who lives with an increased risk of cancer, potential diminished life expectancy, and physical disability. That story might then be followed by the option of termination. But that story is not one I fully recognize, because my story also includes the opportunities multiple exostosis has afforded me. Unable to do contact sports, I was encouraged to embrace my gift in music. The gift of music has brought me huge joy, being the base of lasting and deep friendships and an extraordinary insight into the building and holding of community. Without my run-in with cancer and paralysis, I doubt I would have put myself forward for ordination. I daily give thanks to God for the fact that I have to live an interdependent life, one that overflows with the giving and receiving of extravagant love, the very means through which we all reflect God's image. And yet, Synod, all too often, it is the negative narrative that is most often reflected back onto me. Synod, as a church, we need to listen to and learn from the lived experience of those with Down syndrome and all those who live with disabilities. I also agree with the former speaker that Synod has missed a trick today by not inviting someone living with Down syndrome to share their lived experience with us here in the chamber, centre stage, rather than on the fringe. I welcome any new blood test that can diagnose without putting the unborn baby at risk. But I do call for greater training for those who share the diagnosis with parents, so that a full and honest picture of the true life experience of those living with Down syndrome and all disabled people is shared and valued. Thank you.
Thank you. John Freeman. Yes, John Freeman, thank you. Yes, I do. That has my consent. Will all those in favour, members of Synod, to move to voting and closing this motion, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. Thank you. I ask the Bishop of Carlisle to respond to the debate. Please, you have up to 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to express my huge gratitude for everybody who's contributed in such a very sensitive way to this very, very important debate. Several people have spoken from their own personal experience, and that has been deeply moving, and we're hugely grateful to you all. Thank you. There isn't time now to thank all individuals who've spoken by name or to raise all the issues that have been discussed, but some of the key themes that have emerged from what people have said, for me, have included, first of all, the meaning of full humanity and what we have to learn, the lessons we have to learn, not only from people with Down syndrome, but also from other conditions as well. Another important theme has been the importance of parents who are told that they may have a Down child, having really informed choice. And the need for all of us to rejoice in diversity, including intellectual diversity, and the necessity of talking not about the risk of having a Down's baby, but about the chance of having a Down's baby. Language matters, and several people have referred to the importance of being positive about this rather than negative. There is currently no support pathway that I know of for parents with Down's children, and that is one of the things that, if this motion is passed, we will commit ourselves to pursuing in every way that we can. It is an ongoing journey. It's not the first time the Church has been dealing with this particular question, and it won't be the last. But at the heart of it all are issues about identity and value, not just the identity of those with Down syndrome or indeed other conditions, but about the identity of every one of us here as somebody made in God's image. And the consequence, the outcome, the result of this motion will have wider implications as we send a message from the Church to the whole of our society. Now, two people mentioned the fact that we seem to have missed a trick by not having somebody with Downs saying something to us. Those who were at the Fringe meeting yesterday heard Heidi, and there have been several references to Heidi, who was absolutely fantastic. But I want to close now and give the last word to some people with Down syndrome who have been following rather closely what we are doing here this afternoon.
Thank you for valuing people with Down syndrome.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We move to vote on item 16 as amended, including item 31. Due to the fact that this item calls on Her Majesty's Government to take action, as well as bearing in mind the public interest, I order a count of the whole synod. Thank you. This is a counted vote of the whole synod. I'll give you a moment.
I guess a minute anyway.
Can I remind you, you will have a minute to get your devices in a moment. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So this is a counted vote of the whole synod. Those in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period would end in 15 seconds. The voting period has ended.
The results of the counted vote of the whole synod. Those in favour, 284. Those against, 0. Recorded abstentions, 0. May I say thank you very much for the way everyone has responded to this debate. Thank you. That concludes this item of business. Thank you again.
If you want to get home, before proroguing, may I just thank the whole Synod, first of all, and particularly those for whom it's been inconvenient to be here today, for staying till the end. It's been hugely worthwhile. Secondly, to say what good debates we've had, and thank you for that. It's been really excellent. Thirdly, to thank especially the NCI staff, the sound and security people, everyone who's been making the Synod work to be here on a Saturday. We do appreciate it, and this isn't something said so often, but we appreciate very much to the journalists and people in the press who have also given up their Saturday thanks to us. Now we move back into good legislative mode. In accordance with Standing Order 45, I prorogue this group of sessions. Please stand for the blessing. We have talked about many people. And we've heard from some. So may the peace of God keep all those about whom we've discussed, whose voices we have heard and those voices we have not heard. May that peace keep and guard us in the knowledge and love of Jesus Christ. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be amongst you and remain with you and those whom you love, now and always. Amen. Thank you very much indeed. Bon voyage.